I want to welcome everyone to our workshop today, measuring impacts using most significant change with Odile David Doréus. Today's event is sponsored by American University's Measurement and Evaluation Program. At American University, we are committed to pursuing inclusive excellence. One of our practices, shared from our Indigenous and Native communities, is to offer a land acknowledgement at the beginning of our meetings and events. The goal is to build our mindfulness of the historical processes in which we still participate. American University is founded on the unceded land of the Nacotchtank, Anacostan, and Piscataway peoples. I ask you to join me in acknowledging these communities, their elders, both past and present, as well as future generations. American University also acknowledges that it was founded upon exclusions and erasures of many Indigenous peoples, including those on whose land this institution is located. With this acknowledgement, we commit to working to dismantle the ongoing legacies of settler colonialism. Those of you who attend our events know that we always provide a land acknowledgement. I would encourage you today to take this a step further and do some research on the land where you are sitting. If you're not aware of the history of the land, I will put a couple of links in the chat that you can use to do some research on the history of the land where you are located. Before we get started today, I would like to hear where you are joining us from. So if you'd like, perhaps write in the chat box where you're joining us from, and we will go ahead and read it out. We have Arlington, Virginia, Salem, Massachusetts, Ann Arbor, Michigan. I wonder if it's cold there already. Muriel's Inlets in South Carolina, Annapolis, Vienna, Seattle, Washington. So we have people that are joining us from all over the country. Hamilton, New Jersey. Yay. Welcome again, and thank you for joining our workshop. Our speaker today is Odile David. Odile is an alum of our certificate in project and monitoring and evaluation program and an M&E specialist for FHI 360. She will speak on how she has used most significant change to measure impact in community health, livelihoods, and youth programming in several countries in Africa and the Caribbean. Thank you, Odile, for leading this workshop today. I'm going to hand it over to you.
Thank you so much, Professor Beverly, and I'm happy to be with you as well. So feel free to interrupt me as I will be going through the presentation. If you have any question, comment, or when you want to share your thoughts, please go ahead, unmute yourself, or just to add your question or your input into the chat box, and then Professor Peters will be helping me monitoring the chat while I will be speaking. Thank you. So more and more in recent decades, donors and implementers of development projects or even humanitarian projects as well, you know, they are putting more efforts and putting more thoughts into finding ways to measure their interventions. So many times evaluations are not always planned. So they are not conducted per se. And then when they are conducted, not all organizations, you know, they have the bandwidth to make sure that they have to institutionalize the learning from the evaluations, to making sure that all of these recommendations are being addressed in future programming. So to mitigate that, donors and implementers often tries to find other means to measure their intervention. And then MSA, the most significant change technique, is often used in that regards. And I can say that is widely recognized by big donors and also are used by important organizations as well. So if you are involved in mail duties in your current responsibility, or if you are more in the management or operational side of it, working on proposal, for example, This presentation will provide you with important information about how MSA could be included as a technique for the project you are working on. You will be able to learn about the resources needed to implement MSA and to know the timing of implementations and many great tips and tricks that can be helpful. But if you are not working or engaging on having any roles that I mentioned, I think this presentation will still be relevant to you because MSA, as you will see it, is very flexible and then can be potentially adapted to your own field of work. So stay tuned, and then for the next hour or so, and then I'm gonna get started now. Presentation is freezing. Are you able to see the change of screen?
You know, we only see the title slide right now.
It's not okay.
There you go.
I'm good now. So as the professor mentioned it, I'm Odile David Doréus. I was born and raised in Haiti. Currently, I am working as the male specialist at FHI 360 within the research and evaluation units, and I'm based in Washington, D.C. I have an MBA from the University of Notre Dame of Haiti, and then as also Beth mentioned, I am an alumni from the American University. So this was a great experience personally and also in my career. I have extensive experience implementing MSA. I have done it in several occasions for several domains of change. We will go over it later on. And then both for monitoring and evaluation. And then I'm very excited to be with you today. In terms of the content, the objective of the workshop, I'm gonna go over an overview of the MSA technique. That's gonna be a very brief overview, as I think I will prefer use the time to discuss more about the key steps to implement MSA, and also share a bit of my experience from using the technique for monitoring and evaluation. So in order to get a sense about your level of familiarity of the technique, we have a poll, Bev. I am not able to see the chat, but okay, yes. So I would like you to select which of these are more can describe better your current situation. Either you are familiar with MSA, are you familiar but not yet implemented it? Have you already implemented it or not? So please go ahead and make your selection.
I'm not sure if you can see the results.
No, I'm not.
Okay, so we have about 35% are familiar but have not implemented, and about 60% are not familiar, and 6% have already implemented. So the majority of people are not familiar or are familiar but have not implemented.
Okay, great. So so the presentation will let me okay, now it's showing up for me. Okay, thank you. So I think we have a great group. So those of you who are not familiar, you will get a sense of what the technique is about. Then you can do some more research in order to understand it better. And then those who have not implemented it but are familiar with the technique will be able to also to learn from the key steps to go through in order to implement the technique. And then those who have implemented can share also their experience with us later on. Okay. It takes time again to switch. Are you able to see? No? Are you able to see me switching?
We just have the workshop objective still.
I don't know what.
There you go. All right, so that's,
Can you see?
now we see the poll.
I'm not seeing anything. Let me see.
We have the slide that says, please choose the option that best describes. So this was the poll slide.
You don't see the other one?
No. There you go. What is most significant? Okay, wait, we're back to the poll slide.
It's moving. Is it moving?
No, we've got the please choose the option that best describes your experience with MSc. Now it's a cartoon.
Okay, I can see it. I apologize for all of the technical difficulties. So what is the most significant change? The most significant change is the qualitative monitoring and evaluation technique developed by David and Jess Doreus. The image that you are seeing in this slide is come actually from the guide that they developed to present and then provide all of the details for the technique. And then we are giving credit for that. And then those of you who are not familiar with the MSc technique, this is a great start to go through this guide, which provide all of this information, key information. So the most significant change involves collecting stories at the field level, where the individual beneficiaries are asked actually the question about what is it for them they think is the most significant change in their lives as the result of this specific intervention or specific given intervention. So the beneficiaries then they tell their stories of change, and then these stories are being recorded. Then as the further steps, the stories are then read, they are analyzed, and then they are selected through a participatory process with project staff and then with other key stakeholders that are involved in the implementation of the project that is being implemented. So overall, this is a process very creative and open. And then this process allows us to capture unintended outcomes as well, unintended results. And then this comes straight from the beneficiary's perspective. And then there are those who actually identify the impact of their project in of the program in their own view. So they are very put at the heart of the process. So overall, it's a beneficiary story of change. MSc is a beneficiary stories of change. It's participatory, as I just mentioned. It's outcome-based M&E. That means that we are focusing on the results, and then there is no indicator at all. Usually when we say M&E, there is always indicators, which is key in helping M&E professionals, showing the progress and then the achievement of a given intervention. But MSc doesn't work at all with indicators. And then there is no predefined change. We are not going to talk with beneficiary and then have already in mind a set of predefined change. We go and then they are the ones to share what they are consider doing as the change based on their own perspective and then not what the project has specified itself. So here we can see the key steps to implement MSc. First of all, it's important to work on the scoping, the purpose of the purpose you want to design the MSc system for. And then you get started and then you collect your first MSc stories. Another step will be to establish some domain of change as you get this first set of stories. This is one way of doing it. There is also another ways of doing it. Then I will touch on that as I'm going through the presentation. So the domain of change are specific areas of change that you would like to look at based on your intervention. Your intervention might have many components, and then you might decide, okay, you want to focus on this specific aspect. At the same way, you might not specify any aspect and then go try to collect the MSc stories. Then based on what you have, you collected, you can determine and or create, develop, extract some domain of strengths based on the results of the stories that you will be having. So the next step is to establish an ongoing collection of MSA stories. How is it that you are going to plan to collect these stories? Determine a structure to select these MSA stories, because you will not be using all of these stories that you will be collecting, and then we will see how to do that. Later on, it's important to determine a process for reviewing the MSA stories, and then feedback, verification, secondary analysis, meta monitoring, reflections, or other steps that can be considered for implementing MSA. For the purpose of this presentation, we're gonna focus more on steps 4 through 7 as a way to show you the different steps you need to think of when reflecting about MSA, to see how you can potentially use it for your own programming. And then our focus for now will be, for this presentation, will be on these 4 steps. But then one thing I wanted to mention also is that you do not have to go through all of these 10 steps for an to conduct MSA for a given project. So the verification, secondary analysis, reflection, they are alternative. And then you will see this is one of the flexibility level that the MSA technique offers for people who want to try it on for their program. So Bev, let me know if there is any question on the chat, as I'm not able to see.
No questions yet. I did put in the chat the link to some of the MSc information on better evaluation and Rick Davies' work, if anyone wants to follow up on that.
Sure, thank you for that. Okay, so we're gonna go through now the establishing ongoing collection of MSA stories. So like any data collection event, planning is key. So for evaluation purposes, using MSA for evaluation purposes, the time frame for data collection is a bit longer as compared to when we are, as a bit shorter as compared when we are doing it for monitoring purposes. Usually when you have evaluation, you have a specific time, usually 1 week, 2 weeks, depend on the scale of the evaluation, but then we have the possibility to have much more time when you are using it as monitoring purposes, for monitoring purposes. Why is that? It takes longer for monitoring because usually program staff, they are involved in the data collection for the MSA stories. And in that sense, it's usually a good thing to not put a burden of having them, because they have their regular work to do. What it's good to do is that to embed this process of data collection in their regular day-to-day work. That way they don't feel that it's a burden, and then they are more enthusiastic and then cooperative to actually go and collect the data collection. So I mentioned that in terms of who to be involved, I mentioned that the staff can be involved, and also key stakeholders from the community with whom the project are working with. If they have the capacity, they can also support the process. Roles and responsibility is also important. And the same way it's a data collection event, you need to have people to make the interview, people to take notes, and supervisors to review all of these data that are coming in. And then the training of the field staff is also an important aspect, because it's qualitative data collection. It's not only training on how to make an interview, how to take notes, but also making sure that they understand what is it the MSA is, and then the purpose of which we are trying to collect these stories. And then quality assurance is another important aspect to make sure that if we are not getting great stories, this will have a negative impact on the entire process. So it's good as we have time. Suppose that it's for monitoring purposes. We have data collection from within 3 months, 2 months, depending on what the people in charge have been decided. So it's good to put quality assurance, quality control mechanism in place to make sure that the quality data is being collected. Second step, determine a structure to select the MSc stories. So this is basically the selection process. So at this stage, you've already have plenty of MSc stories that are already available. So it's time for now to find ways to go through them and then to proceed to their selections. So this is a process that is based on a dialogue, and then where disagreement is part of the process, as well as people are discussing to be able to select these stories. The selection process, it had a validity into the process in the sense that it's not one person sitting and then reading the stories and then just select which one they think it's the most relevant one, the most significant. And then it's help also to reduce the massive amount of data into manageable amounts, because based on the length of the data collection, based on the sampling that is in place, you can end up having a lot of stories to review. And then different levels depending on the hierarchy, each person not reading too many stories. So there is ways to organize the selection process where not one person is going through all of the stories that were being collected, and there is no winner, no loser. So it's a dialogue, it's open, it's a participatory, and everyone is involved and are able to express their own views, their own idea, why they think one story is stronger than another one. So it's a very participatory in that regard. Now, as you see earlier, so there is a way to organize to make sure you have a successful selection of MSc stories. The way I do it usually is that I plan for a workshop. So and then it has all of the preparatory aspects in terms of organizing the event and making sure the people comes together. So where is it that you are going to have to hold the event? So is it in the community space? Is it in the office? So this is our decisions that the team that is planning the MSc rounds should have to consider. So who will be involved in that process? Is it the same people who supported the data collection? Is it other new people? Will projects that still be included? What is it, the category of stakeholder from the community that you want to be involved into the selection process? These are important aspects also to consider so that you are able to plan successfully the selection phase. Now, how to select? So as I mentioned earlier, the flexibility level aspect of MSc, from my experience, there is no, this is the way to do your selection process. It's flexible in the sense that those in charge of planning for the MSc can decide what is it, how they want the people involved, the participant in the selection workshop to proceed to the selection of the actual stories that will be used for this overall process. Sometimes people get together, their stories are being distributed, and then they proceed to vote at the end. And then before these votes, people are reading their stories, and then they give their view on whatever they think. This story is stronger, they like the story, they don't like, there is a discussion. So part of it is this aspect of putting the project staff and the community together to speak about stories that are about impact of the intervention that is being implementing in the community. Another way to do it, which is a little more I would say objective, would be to develop scoring tool to be used during the selection process. And then the story tool, again, that will be developed in collaboration with the project staff, where we are identifying some, where people can document what they are considering as strength for all for each of the story they have to review. And then also they can score each of the story by group, and then that way we can know from each group which are the stories that have the more points, that score highest, and then these are the ones that are selected based on the participant, based on a more objective way. So the technique is very flexible. It's depending on who is in charge of implementing it. Then there is possibility to make it simple, to make it more stronger. So it's very up to the people in charge of doing it, have done it both times, and then it went great each of this time, both ways. Now, preparing for the selection workshop. I should say that there is a great level of preparation in order to get to the selection workshop. Story organization is the main aspect, because you would not like to have in your selection workshop, suppose that you have staff that participated in the data collection, that are also invited to the selection workshop. And then you are inviting people from the communities that the story was collecting from in the selection workshop. So you will not like someone to review, for example, its own story. And then you would not like a data collector also to review the same story that he either did the interview for or have taken the note for. So even before going out and then start the data collection, there should be a coding system in place to make sure that we avoid that. So people are given story new to them, either personally or in managing of having the data collection done, so that they can review and make it more, it's better to do it that way. So this organization start even before going through the data collection phase, and also this coding system is used to make sure that these stories remain anonymous, first thing anonymous, and then also to manage how they will be distributed among the participants during the selection workshop. And then when a translation needs also might be something to consider, because sometimes local dialects are being used, and then there is this need to have some translation throughout the process as well. Determine a process for reviewing the MSc story. So basically here.
So can I interrupt you for a second? There are a couple of questions in the chat.
Okay, sure.
Can you give some examples of some of the criteria you might use on the scoring tool? What makes a story strong?
Okay, so I think it will depend on what is it that you are collecting the stories from. So what I mean by that, you can, for example, in your scoring tool, leave space where each person can give what they consider as being the strength of the story, and then what is being the weaknesses of the stories. So, and then you can keep it overall like that. So the way I did it, I kept it overall like that, so that this conversation take place into the group during the selection process. So it's not necessary that you have to have some specific criteria. So like when we are doing a grant, to be really, really specific, it's still a qualitative method. So we keep it open, but then to engage to that discussion, to that dialogue between the group to select the stories. Because one other thing that I didn't mention is that the usual setting that I use for the selection workshop is that I do it by group of 6 people, 8 people, based on the number of stories that I have, and then they sit together on a round table, and then they weight the stories. They either if I don't have a specific scoring tool, they take their notes, they take time to review, they take the notes on all of each of these of their stories, and then they facilitate the discussion. So I would not like you to think of it about something being very rigid. Depend on for what type of intervention that you are doing the MSA story, it might be relevant for you to have some more specific criteria to put into a scoring sheet to facilitate the selection process. But then it's also it's still good to not even have some specific criteria, and then to make people being more free to discuss about what they think these stories are stronger or less stronger than the other ones.
And then the second question is, how can you ensure participation by community members who might have limited literacy?
Okay. This is a good point, because what happened is that if the person is not able to read, that can be an issue if this is not considered in the way the selection process is being done. So if in your communities you have people that can read, and then this is these people that you have included in your selection process, then you can go ahead and then, you know, use your timing and then say, okay, we're gonna spend 30 minutes in reading the stories, and then we engage in the discussion. But if we know that most of the people, they cannot read, for example, and then you can redesign the selection process where you will have one staff member with the story, and then they can discuss. So there are still ways to engage people in the process. It's just a matter of thinking ahead about that and define ways to facilitate this integration of these groups that you know, they have a low literacy level. Yeah. Anything else?
Those are all the questions now, but I would just, if anyone has any questions, please put them in the chat, and between slides, we can go ahead and ask them. Okay.
So, yeah, so I think I can go for, in terms of reviewing the MSA story. So the process doesn't end after a selection workshop, for example. When planning for MSA, the team also can decide of the various layers of revision that they want to include in their selection and in their MSA implementation. So the goal might be, for example, from out of the selection workshop, we have selected 30 stories. Then we can go through a second layer of revision where the manager of the senior level, the manager of the intervention, for example, can go through them and then select, reduce the amount by selecting, for example, 20 from these 30s, and then have a third layer of a revision, and then to come up like with 15 or 10 stories for the process that we will be continuing to go through the other steps, including the feedback, as I will see it later on in the presentation. So again, there is not something stone in the work saying that this is the way that you have to do it based on my experience. So based on my experience, this is always a conversation that I have with the team where we discuss together, and then we convene, okay, this is the way that we are going to proceed, and then to consider as additional layers of revision for this process of MSc. Feedback. Feedback is an essential part of the MSc process. And then these days, we have important donors, like you were saying, that is giving very big importance and encouraging implementers to have this component in the interventions, in the programming, and then it's not really per se specifically linked to MSc. So feedback is important because this is a way for you to get back to the community and then to share the stories that are being finally selected, because they participated. They are those who provided the stories, and then this is important to get back to them, and then to find ways to communicate these stories back based on you know, and that will depend on the setting of the programming as well. There might be already platform to communicate with the community, so we can use this platform that already exists for the project to come and then to present the stories, and then to have kind of a station to explain, okay, why they were chosen, why not, and then also to provide recommendation based on the change that were given. Because one thing I didn't mention is that as a monitoring purposes, there is a way in the questionnaire, I would say, that you will be using to collect the story, also to ask these people about any kind of recommendation that they may have for the programming. So all of these are additional ways to collect this feedback to collect this information from them, information that is available for the project to address, and then also it can be shared back to the community about, you know, what is it that they provided recommendations for. Okay, and now in terms of story collection, the basis will be to interview. So it's inviting people to tell you his story or her story. What is it that you think, that you consider as the most significant change in your life as a result of this given intervention, of this X intervention, or the name of the project you are conducting the MSc for? So it's usually a casual, open conversation. It's a very basic interview guide, not complicated. If we have some of you in the audience that have very long and complicated guide of interview, this is not the case. This is very simple. And then with this question as being the key, what is it that you consider as the most significant change in your own life as the result of the project? So doing the interview for MSc story is not recommended to lead, but then probing is always important to do, because this is also linked to the importance of training the data collection staff so they can understand. So when you are asking this question, what's the most significant change in your own life, it can happen that the beneficiary at first describe well what is it that this concept is he or her consider as the most significant change. So in that sense, it's very important to make sure that you probe, so that the person can, the interviewee is comfortable that he has been recorded, documented a real story of change, and that we can use it later on and then to make to make sure that a strong story has been collected. So it's important to very probe during the interviewing for MSc stories. And then also recommending to record verbatim, or you can use a tape recorder, you can have your notes. So all of these are things that you can do during the interview phase of MSc stories.
So there was one question that David had. When you go through and you collect the stories and you explain why it is that you select them, do you create kind of a rubric that you would use to go through the process of why it is that you explain, or is it open-ended or something else?
So say it again, please.
When you go, do you have those who select stories provide a list of reasons why they selected the stories? And then
yes.
a follow-up, do they create a kind of rubric as they go through the process?
Yes, so so the question, this would happen during the selection process. So during this workshop that I was mentioning earlier. So it's two ways. If you are not using a specific scoring tool that you printed, you handed over to the different groups that you will have that day, you will not have per se any any documentation of this process, of this conversation, of the reason why these stories have been collected. But if you do have the story guide, all of these are things that you have as documentation that you can go over if you need. If you would need, for example, to go into the feedback phase that I was mentioning, and then you need to explain why the team who selected the story think that they were selecting, these are information that you could use. But if it was done in a more without the storing tool, this will not think that you will have, recorded, documented on paper for you to find. So that will depend on the choice that the team would have to make during the workshop phase, during the selection process. Nothing else?
That's it.
Okay, thank you. So now recording the stories. The process of quality assurance, quality control is very key in the MSc. I remember in the earlier days that I started implementing MSc, this was an important matter for me, and then which I need to improve for the remaining rounds that I've done. So I mentioned in previous slides about the importance of having roles and responsibilities. So it's very important. So as the stories are coming in, it's important to make sure that you have someone that can go through the story and then to provide coaching to the interviewers. So that as a way to make sure, okay, this is, if the change is not well captured, all of these technique for recording and then to interview and then to probe, this is an opportunity to make sure that it's being used, and there is someone in charge of doing that prior to move forward into the next step and then to conclude the data collection stage. So different levels of accuracy, we can have tape, record, so whatever the team decide to do, record as close to verbatim as possible in the first person, and then to review note when returning the office. So it's a two level. So the interviewer can review notes, give it to the supervisor who wants to go through these stories, and then if there is need for coaching, make sure that this coaching actually they happen. Yes, so overall, in terms of the steps, the key steps to consider for MSc, we've gone through them as not in deep details, but providing some details for you to get an idea, and then to make you think about how it can be done in case you could decide to do it in the future. Now, I am going to move a little about my personal experience using MSc, and then this last part of the presentation, as also the time is a bit running. In Haiti. So in Haiti, I've done mainly MSc for monitoring purposes. So, and then sometimes I might not define a category to look at the component of the programming to look at. I might go like that blind. And then in some other occasion, I might say, okay, this time will be collected with the beneficiaries that are, of the livelihood aspect of the programming, of the community health aspect of the programming. So in terms of preparation, is to discuss and then select the domain of change, the way I just mentioned it, and whether you will have domain of change or not, identification of data collection staff who will be involved into the process, and then doing the field data collection, making sure that the stories are being embedded into the regular time of the staff that will be involved into the process to avoid the burden, and then to encourage them, to when they do it, they take their time and do quality interview, quality recording of the stories. Usually the data collection time frame would be 2 to 3 months with data quality control in place and responsible identified. By quality control, you can even have specific form for the supervisor to check, each story that is being submitted to him or her. So in terms of story collection, so 3 rounds of story selection, and then the final best MSC story, they're being translated, packaged, shared in the community as part of the feedback phase.
There was a question on that last slide. If the data collection is short, around 6 weeks, probably 2 weeks in the field, is that enough time to use this approach?
So that person will be 2 weeks in the field and just doing that? If it's that, like you have a data collection and then this group of people will be having like 5 to 6 hours in a day, a full day of work, just collect stories. For me, it's not an issue. Actually, for the evaluations, we have done it like that, so that it was the case in Tanzania, for example, where you go and then within 2 weeks we collected all of the stories that we needed. So it's now there are things to consider in terms of how many people will be involved, in how many area we want to collect the stories, how far in terms of distance this area, all. And then all of these are things to consider, but I would not say that it's not a reason for not doing this approach. It's just a choice about which, the resources available, the timing you want to have the MSA story. If you want it very quick and then you finish, if suppose you are at the end of the programming, for example, then you want you don't have much time, you don't have like 2-3 months to spend on, you want to finish it, and then the end of the programming is a great timing because the project has been going for some time, so the change are more likely to happen already. So you can just go ahead and plan it for 2 weeks and then it's just fine. For me, that is not an issue at that level. Okay. Now, in terms of the tips for monitoring, it's important to plan for MSc when designing the management plan. In some situation, it can even plan at the proposal level stage. But then if it's not the case, based on your programming, if you see that this is something you want to do when you are designing or developing your project management plan, your project M&E plan, or PMP, depends on how you are calling it in your own organization. This is a moment that you can making sure that this is being included. So it's good to determine the right moment to conduct MSc. You will not like to 3 months after a project has launched to come in and ask people for the most significant change for a 5-year project. So that would not make sense. And then you will not, it can happen that you will not have any significant and then any strong story if the timing is not good. You have to wait and then plan about, how in depth, the activity has been ongoing for the project, and then what's the likelihood of having change already done before deciding to start with the MSc, with a process of collecting stories of change. I need to have a strong data collection team. This is very important, very important. Train the data collection team, identifying people with good interview skills, and then the taking as well. Ensure the proper monitoring of free data collector. This is important. As the stories are coming in, you need to have quality control in place to review the stories of change, to coach the staff that is being collecting the stories to make sure that more stronger, so more quality stories are being collected along as they are coming in, better stories are coming in. And then if there is need for professional translation of stories, then you can do that, because usually they are being recorded in the local language. They are being selected in the local language. And then at some point, if this needs to be included in the report for a journal, and then English, for example, is the language to communicate with the journal, then that will be it will be needed to translate the story into the language of the journal, for example, if you would love to share these stories with the journal. So all of these are consideration to.
There's a couple of questions here. Does the interviewer use the domains of change to ask follow-up questions? For example, if a participant tells a story and focuses only on one aspect of the program, would the interviewer follow up by asking about another domain of the project?
I would not say this is not something that, this is not mandatory to do. Like, you don't have to do it, because even if you collect a domain of change, you can still collect any extra information that, first of all, you can collect any extra information that the participant is giving you as you are collecting, as you are going on the interview. But then if this is something, you know, that is structured since the planning to say, okay, we want for each beneficiary, for each interview to touch on this number of domains of change that we've said we're gonna collect story from, then this is the way to go. It's fine, but this is not something that you have to do per se.
And then the second question, many funders require expected outcomes and domains of those outcomes to be specified upfront in the proposal in order to make the case for the value of the project. How do you navigate that when planning to use MSC?
So there's two things I can answer this question. There is another similar, another qualitative technique also that calls outcome harvesting, also that is being proposed. Sometimes project can propose both, or sometimes it's not. The reason I am overlectured on saying like to already define potential change in advance is because MSA give ways to capture this unintended change. So if you already define this, you are going to collect these stories, and then you already expect this is the change that you want to do, then MSA would not be the appropriate method to use in order to achieve that goal. Because MSA, you go blank, and then you ask the beneficiary what the beneficiary might tell you that might be totally different from what the project was intending to do. So that's why I'm a bit reluctant to say, okay, I would suggest in advance or take time to think about which, what is it the change that I'm expecting of obtaining throughout an MSA process. I would rather showcase it in a way that this is all of the processes in terms of M&E that I will be using to make sure that what the project, the goal of the project, what the project is expecting to achieve, I can monitor that through these methods to make sure that they are achieving. But then the MSA will be additional to that, because MSA is additional, and then the stories you will have can be linked to the expectation results or outcome of the project, but then it cannot be the case as well. So I would rather prefer to keep it open and then to give ways to capture this unintended change or unintended outcomes. Yeah. I can move forward.
Yep. Thank you.
So for Tanzania, we use it as an evaluation. We were a team of 3 consultants, and then it was for a major social mobilization campaign. So it was additional in the sense that we worked in collecting the stories of change at that level, but then still as an evaluation also, there were still focus groups that were planned. There were still interviews also that were planned in order to capture. So in order to capture the whole figure as part of the evaluation methodology. So it was used, but then also we still add these additional regular ways to collect for evaluation, focus group, key informant, and interviews. So for Tanzania Red Cross, volunteers conducted house-to-house visits. So it gives the ways to the direct interactions toward household belief and other barriers against vaccination. And then one other advantage was that the Red Cross volunteers, they speak the local dialects. So we went in many areas in the countries and then working with volunteers from that area. So the Red Cross volunteers, they conduct the follow-up visit as well. So one thing I think it's worth mentioning here is that because we've selected different part of the countries, so we had to work with different groups, and then each time we would need to orient the team on the MSA technique, and then train them on how to collect the stories and do this selection process in multiple times because it was in different locations. So I think this, I mentioned that to answer to one of the participants that had this question about whether is it okay to just, plan for a specific short time to collect the stories. I think this was the experience that I had with the Tanzania Red Cross. And then it was used also as an evaluation for an FHI project in Zambia, the Youth Face project, which was a project, a youth development project aimed at building youth civic engagement skills through training and internship. So at the same time, the project was developing the young people skills to get them prepared for internship and civic engagement, but also they are having this strengthening also aspect of the organization that were receiving this youth as in the internship process. So Zambia is one of the examples I would say where we used the scoring sheet where people were able to document what they think the story is strong, the story is weak, and then they give us a score to the stories, and then we tabulate the scores, and then that way we get the top selected stories for each of the group that were included into the selection process. In terms of differences using MSC for monitoring and evaluation, for monitoring, as you see it, and I mentioned it many times, there is a longer period for data collection in order to make sure that there is to lessen the burden into the staff. As usually we use staff for that. The feedback mechanism is part of the process because it's there. It's not a fixed activity. It's not at the end of the project, and then the staff is still there to embed all of these results into feedback days into the community. It's conducted by project staff where common language is used. And then also there is more opportunity to train and coach data collection staff as you don't have 1 week or 2 weeks to collect data. So as you are getting in the data, you have a person assigned as a supervisor that can coach the project staff that is in charge of collecting an X amount of stories, and then provide this capacity building aspect to the staff. As an evaluation, it's a more complex planning in the sense that depending on the scale, you will not need to travel and then to repeat the process for various groups so that it's more complex than if it was done for monitoring and evaluation, for example, where you could have, like for monitoring, you could have just one selection workshop, and then evaluation you will have to plan for multiple selection to make sure that the people in the area where we are collecting the story are involved into the selection process as well. So the feedback step is not per se embedded into the evaluation because if it's happened, for example, at the end of the project, then you have staff available to do that. And there is the particularity of language also when external consultants are involved. For example, in Tanzania, I was not speaking the local language. And then there was also, you need to account for translation needs during each of these selection workshop process, for example, so which might take a little bit longer when we don't need to account for translation, and then any consultant involved or staff involved is able to speak the language of the area where the stories are being collected from. So for evaluation also, it can be combined with key informant interview and also focus group. And then, so this is some of the differences I wanted to highlight from using MSc for monitoring and evaluation. And in terms of commonalities using MSc for monitoring vs evaluation, I would say that the use of storytelling to understand better project impact is one common thing. And engaging staff in empowering MSc approach, you will find it whether you use it for monitoring or evaluation. And then also the possibility to engage community members in participatory M&E approaches. So even if you are doing the MSc as evaluation, and then you have like just 1 week to collect data, and then you have to have multiple sessions of selection, you still can work with the project staff to make sure that other key stakeholders from the community, some notables, some great key stakeholders, as I mentioned, they can come in and also participate into the revision and the selection of the stories. Other one step further, so these are potential things that you can think of doing once you finalize the process, and then you have your final selected MSc stories. So you can produce a video with the best MSc storyteller, for example. You can design flyers, brochures, and other printable communications material, and then share with the community during this feedback stage that I mentioned earlier. And then you can follow up on the most interesting MSc storyteller for long-term programming. So all of these overall are things that you can come up, you can think of, and then this also is part of the flexibility level of the technique, where you can add, you can remove as you are coordinating, and we put the thoughts, and then reflecting, and then planning the MSc for your project with your project staff. So it's a way also by involving this back and forth with the community, involving them in the selection workshop, involving them in this feedback phase as well. So it's also means to strengthen the community relationships through neighborhood storytelling, and then to be more engaged with those that usually we are working with and then supporting. Yes, so this is the end of the presentation. Thank you for your time, and then it's wonderful. We still have some time in case you want to share any additional thoughts, any comments. So I will welcome those. Thank you.
Thank you very much, Odile. It was super helpful, and a lot of information for everyone to process. Do we have any final questions that people have? I suppose one of my questions would be around the evaluation report that you would write after you collect these stories. Does that report look much differently from a report that's using more traditional means to collect data?
The report has the MSc stories
right.
attached to them, which the other reports do not have. And then it has all of this participatory, effort aspect that is being embedded into the work that is being produced. Because usually you go, the consultants go, the contractors comes, and then they do the, focus group, all of any other, qualitative methods they're using, and then they do the report. So this is additional in the sense that we have that thing added to it.
And we have a question from a program alum. Do you have any examples of evaluation reports that use MSc that are public and can be shared with us?
I don't know if they are public, I have it, but this is something I probably could ask and then follow up with Professor Peters in case, but I would need to check at that in that record.
That would be really helpful. And if,
Yeah.
if possible, then once we get the recording of the event today, we could attach the report to the recording as well.
Yes, someone else has a question. You mentioned that MSc will have evaluator and unintended consequences. What is one of the most surprising unintended consequences that you learn about doing evaluation? So the example that comes into my mind, I'm not sure if it's the most surprising, and then I'm not sure it was an evaluation, but I remember we have this project on community health, going out into the communities and then to sensitize about health, all of these things. And then there was one woman I remember. So what was her most significant change was anything linked to all of this great information that is being providing for them to improve their health. It was because the fact for her to be amongst those to go into the community to give these matrices, it just making her more closer to some of the category within this community that she would never, talk to or get in any way any kind of interaction with. So this was not expected. So when you are doing, suppose that you are doing sensitization on messaging on cholera, this is not expected. You are not doing that to make sure, that people being closer to traditional preachers or traditional medical practitioners in the community. This is something that, because you are involving people, because they are working together, because they go visit the people at where they have this strength and the relationship, that can go beyond the programming, because as you're living in the same area, they have the opportunity to plan and then to build on this relationship to do more for their community.
Super helpful.
Thank you.
Any other questions? I think that's it. I want to thank you very much, Odile, for leading this workshop today. We really appreciate the time that you spent preparing it, and you were so meticulous providing us with information on how we can use this technique and to helping us to understand how we can implement this alongside some of our other evaluation methods, just another tool in our evaluation toolbox. So thank you very much for joining us today. Really appreciate it.
Thank you. Thank you so much, Rebecca. And thank you to each of you. You spent reserve the time to join. And then thank also for your participation in all of your questions. Really appreciate it. Thank you.
Thank you.
Thank you.